Hi, I'm Dr. Elisa Demena, and we're going to go over some of the basics of smooth and cardiac muscle. Great. So remember, there's actually three types of muscle that we looked at, but I already spent a lot of time talking about skeletal muscle in some other videos if you'd like to review. So we're going to focus now on cardiac and smooth muscle. The first thing to know is let's talk about smooth muscle. So smooth muscle lines all of the luminous organs of the body, so like hollow types. And the lumen is this like kind of entry, is the center point, right? It's the hollow part, the hallway part. And then surrounding, right, would be where we'd find the muscle. And the muscle can do things like contract, thus making the inner lumen smaller and pushing its contents further downstream, or expanding, allowing for the inflow of new contents or additional contents. All right, so some of the organs that use it are things like your respiratory, your airways, blood vessels, arteries, especially things like your digestive system, all kinds of parts of that, small intestine, stomach, esophagus, anything you can think of in that tract pretty much. Well, I guess not anything, but a lot of parts of it anyhow. All right, so how are they shaped? How are they different? Well, number one is they only have one nucleus, ever only one, and they kind of are a little thinner. And they use contractile proteins differently, which we'll look at in a little bit. The other one we want to talk about is going to be cardiac muscle, right? So cardiac muscle, as shown here, does something different. It doesn't line a tube, it lines the heart itself, which has 4 different distinct chambers, and also manages blood flow in and out of the lungs, in and out of the body. So it has to do a lot of things. It has to move in a lot of different directions at once, which is kind of the hallmark of cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle can either have 1 or 2 nuclei, meaning it's either uni or binucleate. As you can see here, this bottom one has one with 2 nuclei in the cartoon and one with only 1, right? Okay, so let's talk about how come that's important. Well, if you're, say, a heart, you don't usually have a one, you're not contracting and relaxing in a single direction, right? Like a skeletal muscle does, or like the inside lumen needs to be. So in order to contract kind of in this like semicircular method, we're going to have multiple branch points, right? So we have to have arms and legs that are going to branch around that organ of the heart. So those arms and legs are going to be different for lots of muscle cells, whereas some have up to 3 branch points, maybe even more. Many also only have 2, so they don't always have the same shape, which is an important hallmark feature of cardiac muscle. Another thing that's important and how you know you're looking at cardiac muscle is the presence of the intercalated disc. So these bright pink, and now I'm highlighting them yellow, stripes that you were seeing, these very dark ones, those are intercalated discs. And so that's where one muscle cell actually fuses with the end of another muscle cell, and it becomes thicker. And that means you have an intercalated disc there now. Those are where they're joined together. It's a form of junction. So smooth muscle. So here's an example of smooth muscle, and using the digestive system because it's a really easy one for smooth muscle. There's a lot of it. You'll note that oftentimes it's layered in 2 directions, longitudinal as well as a circular smooth muscle layer. And that's so we can get some kind of maximal function, more than one direction. Also, what you can see here is the same phenotype where instead of things like intercalated disc, we have nicely layered out single nucleated muscle cells. Here's what we were talking about with the contractile proteins. So before, when we were talking about actin and myosin and how they work together to create and use the sarcomere in striated tissue, the muscle cells for smooth muscle work a little bit differently. They are core anchored at what we call these little dense bodies, right? So these dense bodies are able to pull or help facilitate the contraction process by pulling these other proteins that are wrapped around it, right, in these filaments that are wrapped around it, and it pulls it closer together. So it looks a little bit kind of like a Genoa salami becoming compressed when it's contracted, as is shown here. Now when it relaxes, it's able to relax quite a way. So it's a little bit more of a simplistic, relative at least to the sarcomere, method of contraction and relaxation, but it seems to work really well for all those luminous cavities inside of organs such as the digestive tract, respiratory tract, and your arteries. So how does it work, the mechanism of contraction? Well, firstly, for smooth muscles, it's not fast. It's not like a sprint. It's not like picking up a barbell. It's usually slow. You definitely don't want to have your tacos sprinted through your digestive system as fast as you can run a mile, right? Not going to be very comfortable for starters, and it's not going to get very many nutrients. But what you do need is a slow and steady turnover of the taco as it's digested, right? So you can extract as many nutrients as you can while also mashing it up and moving it along through the absorptive process in the small intestine as well as large intestine. So these slow synchronized contractions help with that process. Not too fast, not too slow, just right. So all of these cells are coupled electrically through what we call these gap junctions. And so it means that all of the action potentials that cause or stimulate contraction in these muscle cells happen from a cell to cell type. If one cell becomes excited, then adjacent cells will pick up that excitation and amplify it through the tissue. Now, some cells are even self-excitatory, meaning that they depolarize without external stimuli. They don't need it. What we call these are the pacemaker muscle cell sheets. So, however, sometimes these pacemakers don't always exclusively just respond to themselves. They respond to things like stretch, right? And then they want to contract back down, or sometimes even respond to innervation or stimulation from the nervous system. So let's get back to that response to stretch. Okay, so that particular stimuli works in what we call the stress relaxation response. So basically, it's just a brief response to the stretch, and then it adapts back to its new length. Okay, and what that does is it allows an on-demand type of contraction or movement in the smooth muscle. And so what it does is it lets things or organs such as the bladder or the stomach just temporarily store their contents without all of a sudden expelling them immediately. So length as well as tension can be changed, modulated, depending on where the organ is, what its function is, and how the smooth muscle is arranged. So, for example, it can contract and relax, and relaxing even, almost a huge amount of its original resting length. And what that means for you is it allows you to store large volumes. So when you eat that burrito and then have a slice of pie, for example, it allows your stomach to kind of stretch out a little bit to accommodate. Or when you really have to go to the bathroom, for example, after drinking a 32-ounce soda, but the movie isn't over yet, it allows you to hold that volume for a little bit before it returns back to its original shape. Types of smooth muscle? Well, it varies. It varies by things such as the organ, as well as how the fibers are arranged together, how they're organized. Some are innervated and some do not rely on inputs from the nervous system at all. And it also depends on what types of response to stimuli they will use in order to facilitate contractions or relax altogether. So generally we categorize smooth muscle into two different groups, unitary and multi-unit. So unitary meaning single and multi-unit meaning multiple or larger, greater numbers of overall smooth muscle. So let's talk a little bit about cardiac muscle. So unlike skeletal muscles and actually unlike smooth muscles altogether, cardiac muscles need to move in more than one direction at one time, which is why we took a look earlier on at how they have many different branch points, how they don't all look the same as each other. It allows them to connect and move in multiple directions at once. As you can see here, right, the muscle sweeps, curves, and moves so that it can have kind of a pump instead of just a squeeze and stretch and relax, squeeze and relax, right? Anyway, so cardiac muscles are actually striated to a point, and they do contract along their longest axis. However, they still have that wrapping around phenotype, which allows the entire muscle cell to kind of shorten during those contractions and then relax, getting greater length during the relaxations. Again, here's another image of cardiac muscle, just kind of illustrating that point where they all have these different shapes, like this one right here, two branch points, for example. Here's this one, two branch points, some are a little bit longer. We got multinucleated, single nucleated here. Oh, here's the end of this one, right? Two branch points here. And all of them are going to meet at that intercalate, oops, let's get the color changed. Yeah, there we go. At intercalated discs, right? That's the branch point meeting junction. They make it bright pink in all of those histology stains, right? So it's generally involuntary and it is striated technically. We call them cardiocytes, meaning heart cells. So it's the muscle cell of the heart. And they're short, thicker, but also branch types of cells. Here's a photograph of the same thing. So still pretty small. And what this illustrates is the point I was telling you earlier about these hot pink looking, really dark little striations all over. So they're not super organized, but they do have one thing that they're consistent with. They always join one muscle cell to another cardiac muscle cell, intercalated disc. These junctions and the branching phenotype of the cardiocytes or muscle cells allow for that shape of conventionally the heart. Right? So semicircular, can twist around, and it has that unique kind of ability to contract and relax at different times as needed. So let's talk about those contractions and relaxations. So there's a lub sound of the heart, right? The heart isn't always open and dilated, and the whole thing isn't always contracted and closed off, right? So different ventricles and atria need to be open and closed at different times to allow for that circulation of blood so it can move through all the components of the heart. It's controlled, at least, by these two primary nodes, the sinoatrial node, shown here, and then the atrioventricular node, ventricular node. Oh, let me change the color on that. Boop. There you go. Atrioventricular node, right here. So as you can see, they comprise together to make this characteristic lub of the heart when we're looking at heartbeats and tracers. Sinoatrial node is the first one to depolarize. It controls these top atria. However, it also sends a degree of stimulation to the atrioventricular node, right? This one has much more powerful and far-reaching effect, at least in terms of directness. So it's going to reach these lower ventricular regions of the heart. But this is where the greatest amount of muscle mass is in the heart itself. So it's pretty strong stuff. So those are some of the basics of smooth and cardiac muscle. It's definitely not everything, but it's what you need to know just on a brief level. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful day.